Hello, everyone. My name is Chigozi Joseph. I am a transport planner working with Prom Consultants Limited. Yes, I'm also on the committee that is in charge of capacity development for the young professional engineers under the FIDIC Future Leaders Forum, that is under the Uganda Association of Consulting Engineers. In a bid to keep equipping our young professionals with relevant engineering knowledge and taking into consideration that currently we are unable to meet in person to discuss some of the key things that we can do as engineers in developing our country, I've thought it wise that we start developing some presentations on key issues that we can discuss on our relevant platforms and also share knowledge with all the other professionals around the world and in Africa. Yes, what I want us to discuss today is a topic that I have at heart, a topic related to climate change. So the title of our presentation today is De-Carbonizing Kampala City's Transport System, a key to the desired sustainable city that we want. Yes, let's start with some facts. Kampala occupies an area of 196 kilometers squared, square kilometers as I may put it. And in these square kilometers, we have about 1.5 million inhabitants. Kampala is regarded as the engine of growth for Uganda. And we also know that Kampala's commercial and industrial activities contribute significantly to the GDP of Uganda. However, we also know that 70% of the global energy carbon dioxide actually is one of the key or major greenhouse gases. So 70% of the total global energy related carbon dioxide is actually associated with cities. And Kampala is not spared at that. In addition, 23% of this 70% carbon dioxide is related to transportation. So transportation actually is a big contributor of carbon dioxide to our atmosphere. Now, in addition to carbon dioxide, we also have another potent climate forcing agent we call black carbon. This arises from burning of fossil fuels. Remember, in our vehicles, in our cars, we burn fossil fuels as we drive them and as we use them for transportation. Now, fossil fuels alone are responsible for 40% of the world's black carbon. We are already seeing the effects of climate change. The impacts are actually already here with us. We see them every day as we move in our cities. We see the temperature rise, we see drought in some areas, we see increased frequency of rainfall leading to floods. This has been actually very common in Kampala. With this in mind, Kampala Capital City Authority committed as part of the Kampala Climate Change Action Plan of 2016 to prioritize sustainable mobility. Now, to further put this into context, a few photographs have been selected from around the city, have been taken around the city. We can see major flooding that has happened in various parts of our city. For those that are familiar with Kampala city, we see the emissions that are coming out of the vehicles. These emissions also lead to a number of respiratory complications that we have today. It's sad to note that actually some of the major respiratory issues that are being seen in our hospitals, many of them as a result of these highly dangerous emissions that are coming partly from our vehicles, personal vehicles, and vehicles that we are moving within our cities. So, do we have any data for greenhouse gas emissions in Kampala? Yes, we do. But first, we need to understand that the energy supply of Kampala is dominated by 1. Biomass, hydroelectricity, and fossil fuel. And in fossil fuel, we are talking about diesel and petrol. The emission data available today so far was developed using the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions, that is the GPC in short. And under this protocol, we're able to deduce that the greenhouse gas emissions in Kampala alone reach an astonishing amount, an astonishing tune of 2.5 tons CO2 equivalent per resident. The national average for Uganda is actually 1.4. So that means if you have Kampala having 2.5, that means the greatest portion of this CO2 emission nationwide, actually comes from Kampala. Now, based on this protocol, it is projected that these emissions will increase by about 55% between 2020 and 2030. We are in 2020. By 2030, if nothing is done, we're going to have these increasing by 55%. I don't think that is actually a good thing. Now, a significant amount of these emissions that we're talking about is actually induced by the decisions taken by city authorities in regards to physical planning, mobility, transport, and waste management. It is these key decisions that are going to influence how much we emit into our atmosphere. So, our energy demand projections. On the right side of your screen, as you see, we have some energy demand projections from 2012 to 2030. However, one key thing that you should note from this graph that is presented here is that the biggest percentage of our energy demand in Kampala is dominated by biomass and petroleum. Electricity takes a very small portion. Now, biomass and petroleum are producers of greenhouse gases. Yet, in our projections, we see that this is the biggest energy. This is the energy that is demanded for the most. Where does this come from? One, we realize that 65% of the vehicles operating within Kampala are operating within Kampala and the greater Kampala metropolitan area. This is the biggest percentage of vehicles within the country actually in Kampala and the metropolitan area. To make this worse, there is use of old vehicles. Old vehicles do not consume fuel the way the new vehicles actually consume fuel. They actually consume more, and that means they emit more. Congestion. A trip that would take 30 minutes is taking 2 hours. That means an engine will be switched on for an extra 1.5 hours, emitting because of congestion. Now, what causes this congestion also is the reliance on the small minibuses for public transport. And of course, to add icing to the cake, there is rapid motorization. Individuals are buying cars. Number plate series keep changing in a shorter time than ever seen before. So with this current trend, by 2050, the cost of adaptation to the climate change that we shall experience by that time is expected to be between 33 million, 103 million US dollars. This could be money that could be put to more sustainable use. And this money, instead of spending it then, we can use less less money to actually put in place interventions that will save us this money that we will need to adapt to the climate change at that time. With all this, we realize that there is need for a paradigm shift in the transport system of Kampala in order to achieve reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So, in that regard, in this presentation, we are going to talk about 3 major decarbonization strategies that we in our cities can take up in order to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions from our transport sector. 1, we need to have mass public transport. However, we need to add, in addition to the mass public transport, we need to have an adoption of alternative fuel. Instead of having buses running on only diesel, can we have buses running on electricity, natural gas, or biofuels, whose emissions are more healthy and non-toxic to the environment? 2, we need to adopt non-motorized transport, that is walking and cycling. However, we need also, in addition to the non-motorized transport, we need to undertake significant urban greening. And 3, there is need for transit-oriented development and development of human resource capacity in low emissions and climate resilient development. We're going to further discuss the above strategies in the next couple of slides. So when you talk about mass public transport, I'll direct your attention to the table on the right side of your screen. Under this table, I want you to look at the fact that as much as the 14-seater matatus, the trips made by the 14-seater matatus are only 21% of the trips made within Kampala city. This 21% transports 82% of the persons, of the people traveling within the city. And then the private cars that only take up 37% of the trips are only able to transport 9% of the people. This state of affairs is what is causing traffic congestion. There is a heavy reliance on private cars, and then the small capacity 14-seater matatus or the taxis. As a result, we have seen severe peak hour congestion, especially during the peak hours, or what we can also refer to as the rush hours. So, because of this issue, KCCA is undertaking plans to introduce high-capacity public transport vehicles in form of eco-friendly city buses and train services. The goal here is to create and promote a mode shift from the private cars and then from the private cars and the taxis to the desired mass transport modes. With this, we will be able to eliminate the peak period traffic congestion. Research has shown that we can actually mitigate about 20% or reduce about 20% of the emissions by mitigating congestion alone. I believe this percentage can even be higher, but we can start here by promoting mass public transport. To put the need for mass public transport into clearer context, this is the street in Seattle on your screen. At the peak hour, you have about 200 people in a total of 177 cars in this street section. If we remove the cars and left the people, we'll have this. You see these people? These people in this section were actually seated in these cars. You can see how much space so very few people are occupying. They're actually occupying the entire street space by each being in a private car. If we get all these people and combine them into a bus or buses, we will only need about 3 buses of about 90 passengers capacity. Do you see how much street space we are saving that can actually be used for other purposes? If we got the same number of people and put them on bicycles, they will still occupy just about the same street space as here. Still, we are saving about 4 lanes actually, 4 lanes. Originally, we are using all the 5 lanes in this case. Here, we are actually saving, we're only using 1 lane and saving their 4 lanes. We can actually get also these people and also put them in 1 light rail train. This is even much better. We save still the other 4 lanes. So with mass public transport, we are going to save a lot of street space as well. This street space can actually be used for viable economic activities. So with mass public transport, we shall actually achieve significant savings in carbon dioxide gas emissions. So a study was done on some of the Asian Development Bank projects, and it was noted that railways contributed the highest savings in terms of tons of carbon dioxide saved per kilometer per lane per year. Railways were closely followed by BRT and closely followed by metro rail transit. All this, the point here is that with mass public transport, we have the capacity to reduce significantly the number or the amount of emissions into the atmosphere coming from our transport vehicles. And we can even take it a notch higher by ensuring that our mass public transport vehicles actually use alternative energy sources such as electricity, which can be in form of solar. We can use hybrid or fuels that are biofuels that actually do not emit the carbon dioxide that actually we are talking about. So a lot of these biofuels are being researched. There's a lot of research going on in terms of electric vehicles. Actually, we have new electric vehicles, buses on our roads today, dubbed the Kayola bus, as you can see in our images on the left and the right side of your screen. So strategy number 2 is the adoption of non-motorized transport. So many commuters actually in Kampala come into the city on foot. Actually, but this number would be greater if the necessary NMT facilities are provided. During the lockdown period, we have seen a lot of people walking into the city. Not everyone knew that this was actually possible, but actually it has, in the last few weeks of lockdown, we have seen that it's actually possible. And in no time in Uganda have we seen more need to have facilities for walking and cycling as we have seen in the past few weeks of the lockdown. So NMT investments promote efficient utilization of the scarce street space. We don't have a lot of space in our cities, but with these NMT investments, they promote that efficient utilization of this space. And this is in terms of person movements per meter of the roadway. And this NMT investment or projects need to be combined with significant urban greening, as you see in our images in this slide. With greening, the plants, the grass, and the trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then produce actually oxygen. So we are having a healthier environment, a cleaner environment when you have a bigger number of green and trees within our environment. Our strategy number 3 that we are going to discuss in this presentation is transit-oriented development. So our cities are expanding. Kampala has expanded from the small city it used to be to now to a bigger city. We have suburbs that are developing. Suburbs that were originally residential are becoming commercial. So the expansion of cities creates a higher car dependency because people now need to travel long distances to access different services and different facilities. Unfortunately, our urban development policies so far have not taken into account mobility. And this has led to significant environmental costs from urban expansion. Urban expansion has eaten away some of our swamps. Some of these swamps have been developed into shopping malls, into houses. However, it is important that we have high density mixed-use development within our cities. This kind of development that will put into consideration walking distances to public transport stations. The goal here is to increase the percentage of the population living and working near public transport stations. We have some good examples. For example, in Copenhagen, where the policy requires that any new construction should be within 600 meters to a train station. What they're trying to eliminate is the need for a person to own a car. If you live within 600 meters to a train station, you can easily walk to this train station and access different parts of the city as you may need. In Curitiba, Brazil, it is even better, where inhabitants do not even have to walk more than 500 meters to access a public transport station or to access public transport. What I'm trying to say here is that our urban planning needs to be modified with sustainable mobility as a guiding principle. Mobility should be a principle guiding our urban planning and urban development. To further explain the point and further to describe what transit-oriented development is all about, we look at this cross-section of the city where you have this central axis where we have our transport system. We have our BRT, for example. It can be a BRT, it can be a train, it can be any mode of mass public transport. So next to the public transport corridor, we have high density residential, business and commercial use of properties. And as we move far away from the transport corridor, we have lower density. So why we're promoting higher density close to the public transport corridor is to reduce the need for someone to actually own a private car and to promote walking and cycling. The more we reduce the need for a person to own a car, the more we'll reduce on the emissions that would have come from this car if this person owns it. Now, intelligent urban growth planning strategies that include densification of cities while ensuring public transport, while ensuring the proximity to public transport, will promote the use of NMT and the public transport. So, and also, if we reduce the level or the rate at which our cities are expanding by promoting this densification around public transport corridors, then we shall preserve the land that was originally used for ecological value, such as the swamps and the forests. There will be no need for someone to go and construct an arcade in the swamp and then later be flooded because of the rising water levels from the lake. Now, in addition to transit-oriented development, we need also to develop our human resource capacity. In what exactly? In low emissions and climate resilient development. Now, this is further emphasized by Article 6 under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, of which actually Uganda is part. Now, under this convention, all parties are obliged to develop and implement educational programs on climate change and its effects. Actually, as we carry on these presentations, this is in line with this particular article. Now, the Uganda Climate Change Policy and the East African Community Climate Change Policy also both prioritize capacity development, information sharing, and research as important elements of climate resilient development. So, development of our human resource capacity is very important if we are to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially in our transport sector. And in order to achieve this, we have several action areas that we need to put our energies to. And one, we need to build a culture of innovation and experimentation in urban areas. We need to see more pilot projects being implemented in the different cities across the country and across East Africa and across Africa. Let's have pilot projects. Let us study these pilot projects, and let the lessons learned from these pilot projects help us even develop better pilots. Yes. Now, we need also to establish and make use of the intermediary organizations such as UACE, UIPE, ERB, the Association of Architects, Uganda Law Society. Now, these organizations can actually act as brokers between the different interests, political, economic, and social. And these organizations will also create a platform of dialogue on all proposed interventions. Thirdly, we need to also undertake strategic, collaborative, and communicative planning. Now, this is very important. I'll repeat this. We need to undertake strategic, collaborative, and communicative planning. Now, with this type of planning, we need to create dialogue between city authorities, the experts that we have in transportation, and communities on the challenges and opportunities in the decarbonization interventions that we propose in our transport sector. And as I conclude, it is advisable that we develop and ensure integrated planning and management of transport and other physical infrastructure that encompass climate predictions. We should also know that our decisions and actions in regards to mitigation and adaptation to climate change will determine whether we succeed or fail in our decarbonization transitions and interventions. And key also to take home as we finish this presentation is that the response to climate change should not be just a matter of setting targets, but should be seen as an important way to achieve resilience, security, well-being, and new forms of economic development. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I call upon all the young professionals that have been able to watch these presentations to prepare similar presentations, and let's share knowledge on these different aspects. For God and my country, thank you for listening.